There was a time when one felt that the fabric of India, and the ethical fabric of India, was being eroded. And most companies, including ours, had to face an issue of dealing with this by participating in subjective activities, be they doing favors for people or actually paying. And the few times that we were approached and stood our ground and did not do that made me go home at night with this wonderful feeling that we didn't succumb. And anybody that says that you can't operate in India without paying, I think needs to look at us as an example, because we grew, and we grew from about 5 billion to 100 billion without participating in anything subjective. So industry can grow in India, and you don't need to succumb. And I think that's the one thing I would say that was probably the loneliest moment or set of moments that one has, and one feels pleased that you were able to go through that period and not compromise your ideals.
When you grow through acquisition and you're acquiring companies and people from other organizations, it can sometimes be challenging to bring the culture of the Tata Group to the acquired company, but also bring the sense of moral obligation and ethics to the people you're acquiring. How have you dealt with that through your acquisitions?
That's a very good question. Most people don't know that when we look at an acquisition, prior to actually going through that acquisition, we spend a lot of time and energy in determining whether the culture of that organization is compatible with ours. We have walked away without anybody knowing that we were looking at a particular company. We have walked away from companies that would have been a good fit, but where the culture would have been alien to our own. And by culture, I don't mean the culture of the rank and file, I mean the culture of the management. And if we, particularly in overseas acquisitions, if we felt that there was a different culture, there are many companies that operate in the manner that they think is fine, but it's, in our view, unethical or a value system that we don't subscribe to, then we have quietly walked away from that company and never acquired it, although the fit would have been a good business fit. And the reason we did that is exactly what you implied. How could we change the culture of that activity without sweeping the management clean and inserting our own management in a foreign geography? We don't have the depth to do that. So it's after we make this determination that we have actually gone in and acquired the company, and it has worked reasonably well, because we have then, by cross-fertilization, changed people, moved people back and forth. And we haven't had a real problem with the acquisitions we've had. We've had to change at time to time a key manager because there's been a problem. Not an ethical problem, but just an operational problem. And it's worked reasonably well.
Talking about advice that you might give to young graduates, and I'm thinking specifically on balancing humility with the desire to be proud and bold.
I think both those attributes are important. I don't think you can make them up or act that without having those feelings within you, those emotions within you. And I don't think you can teach that or you can force that to happen. I think it depends on each person. Many of the people in this room who are students today would find themselves in leadership positions in the near future, and they have to define their own styles in as natural a way as they can. But they need humility, because without that, it's very difficult to, in today's world, to be a good autocratic or dictatorial leader. And it's much more expected that you would be a humble, communicative leader to lead your organization and your employees in a particular way. So all I can say is that this is to be an attribute that comes from within the people that are going to go out into industry, and I hope the education that they receive here will give them both humility and a sense of innovativeness and some balance of both things.
Many in our audience might have been surprised to hear that when you returned to India as a young man, you started on the shop floor at Tata Steel. I wondered if you could share with us a few lessons that you learned at that time.
I was on the shop floor for about 2 or 3 years. And during those 2 or 3 years, I thought this was an absolute waste of time and served absolutely no purpose. I was very wrong, because I learned a lot in those 3 years. Perhaps what I learned best was the question of humility amongst people, because standing shoulder to shoulder with workers for 3 years and being given no special privileges, I learned what the other larger segment of our workforce did, like how they reacted, and very emotionally, when I became chairman of Tata Steel in '91, several of the workers came up to me and said, "Do you remember I was in the blast furnace with you, or I taught you how to read temperatures or whatever?" And not many chairmen have that privilege of being friendly with someone who you could call by their first name, or they could call you by their first name. So I learned a lot. And sorry, long answer to your question.
Not at all. Thank you.
Your companies have always maintained very high ethical standards, despite the fact that they started and have grown in India, which has a known problem with corruption. We were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what was the price that you had to pay for it as you were trying to expand your business, and why do you feel this was worth it?
Price we paid to...
So what she's asking is that the Tata'S group are known for being ethical,
Okay,
and
okay.
India is known for
Right.
corruption. So
He said it more directly than needed.
sorry.
I think we did pay a price from time to time where we lost out on an opportunity that we had. But if you look at what we did, in '91 we were a $5 billion group, and in 2012 we were a $100 billion group. So we didn't, despite all of that, we didn't do too badly in terms of how we grew. But there have been instances where we could have been in one area, could have grown in a particular area, which we have been deprived of doing. So there has been a cost. There has been from time to time a sense of frustration. Incidentally, that is part of the reason why we started to look outside, because it was somewhat easier to grow or to fulfill your ambitions rather than fight the tide within India.
So staying on the topic of acquisitions, I wanted to ask you about a specific one. So looking back now, we see that the Jaguar Land Rover acquisition has been a success. I was curious to what was the specific synergies that attracted you to them in the first place, and what were the keys to their turnaround?
What,
Do you want to repeat it?
there's a lot of boom in.
Sorry, it's specifically asking about the Jaguar Land Rover acquisition. So what
Yeah.
attracted you to them in the first place, and then what were the keys to the turnaround?
Okay.
Thank you.
The truth is that what attracted me initially was the fact that Land Rover was for sale, and that sat nicely over the product mix that we had in India in the SUV area. But Ford refused to separate Jaguar from Land Rover. I didn't see what we could do with Jaguar at that time. It was something that we negotiated and moved back and forth for over a year before we realized that they were never going to be, cut apart and would always be together. And we later found out why, because they were so intertwined in manufacturing facilities that it would have been impossible to sell one without having manufacturing ties with the other. Having taken Jaguar by circumstance, we were pleasantly surprised to see that it was a company that had embedded in it enormous capability and talent, which Ford and in the previous managements to Ford had never allowed the management to really express itself in terms of new product, in terms of direction, etc. And all we did was allow or make a statement to the management and the workers that they could make their own destiny. We were there to support them or to guide them, but we would not dictate to them what they should do. And together they have, in fact, fulfilled that objective quite admirably as things stand. The sales are up 40-odd% from what they were when we took them over. And we are very proud of what they've been able to do. You understand that everybody in a large organization gets further and further from getting the feeling that they're adding value, and they feel that they're little ants in an anthill. So it becomes the job of the CEO to inspire the people and communicate with them and deal with them in a manner that they understand. How well you do it or how poorly you do it, you find out after the event. So I think all large organizations that are successful have CEOs that go out of their way to communicate with their employees, because the greatest asset they have are their employees, and dissatisfied employees or ignored employees are unhappy employees, and they don't give you the best. So I think most successful CEOs give a lot of their attention and time to doing this, and to paying particular attention to the needs of their employees. So And we tried to do the same.
Of course.
Let me ask you, one of the things that I have noticed on my visits to India and globally is the sort of integrity and ethos that is imbued in the whole Tata enterprises. How did that evolve, and how do you sort of inculcate that into, how many employees are at Tata Enterprises now?
About 450,000.
450,000. So how do you create that culture and keep that culture going in that regard?
The culture was always there. From the enterprise was built on that kind of basis. But I accept that you can't vouch for the DNA of every single person that you have. We codified the ethos with great difficulty because no one could put their arms around it and define it. And we had all our employees read it and sign it. We had our directors do the same. And the view I have is that you can show your compliance or your commitment to value systems and ethics by how you deal with an errant employee when he veers away from this or does something that goes outside the sphere of that. And we have been, at least in my time, absolutely hard on it. Didn't matter who it was. If you broke the code, you left the company.